Hidden behind steel doors lie the greatest stories the auto world forgot. From factory wars to near-death legends, this is Vaulted Wheels, unlocking the machines that built America.
Picture this. You're walking down the street and a sports car absolutely stops you dead in your tracks. I mean, it sits incredibly low to the asphalt. It's got this razor-sharp, wedge-shaped geometry, like it's literally a spaceship on wheels. You got the classic pop-up headlights slicing through the dark, and proportions that clearly tell you the engine is sitting right behind your shoulders. Back in the early 1970s, if you saw a machine like this, you just assume it was strictly for the ultra-wealthy, right? You'd guess it was a Ferrari or, maybe a Lamborghini. But you'd be totally wrong. Welcome to our explainer on what might just be the ultimate automotive paradox.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this single question completely upended everything the automotive world believed back in the 70s. You see, this tiny, mid-engined exotic didn't wear the badge of some exclusive boutique racing manufacturer. Not at all. It was actually built by a massive industrial giant, a brand that was mostly famous for producing really sensible, everyday commuter hatchbacks. So it really begs the question, why on earth did a conservative, mass-market company risk millions to build a mid-engine spaceship for the common driver? And how did this single car rewrite the entire rulebook for affordable performance?
To really grasp how radical this was, we kind of have to look at what else was out there on the roads at the time. Over in the US, American highways were totally dominated by these massive, soft-sprung V8 muscle cars and giant station wagons that just lazily floated over the pavement. They were boats, essentially. But over in Europe, this entirely new design language was catching fire: the Italian wedge. It was aggressive, it was meant to slice through the air, prioritizing perfect balance, agility, and these race-bred mid-engine layouts. But there was a catch. That level of exotic engineering was completely out of reach if you had a normal, everyday paycheck.
The ultimate automotive paradox.
So, who was going to bring a multi-million-dollar driving experience to the middle class without going completely bankrupt? Astonishingly, the answer was Fiat. Yeah, Fiat. The car we're looking at was called Project X19. Now, Fiat famously broke with their traditional numerical naming system here. Cars like the 124 or the 128. Instead, they kept the internal prototype development code as the actual commercial name for the car. It was the 9th experimental passenger vehicle in their program. That alone was a huge flashy signal to the world that this wasn't just another economy commuter. But to figure out how a massive conservative brand like Fiat greenlit something this wild, well, we actually have to look at the desperate coach builder who forced their hand. A desperate yachting design gamble. The story of the X19 actually doesn't start in some boring corporate boardroom. It starts as a desperate fight for survival inside the Turin design studios of carrozzeria Bertone. By late 1960s, Bertone's assembly lines were quite literally on the verge of going dark because their contract to build the aging Fiat 850 Spider was wrapping up. To save the factory, Nuccio Bertone needed a high-volume successor to pitch to Fiat, and he needed it fast. So, his chief designer whips up this radical concept called the Auto Bianchi Runabout, debuting in 1969. And it just sat on a shelf for 2 years. But then, in 1971, Fiat's legendary Playboy boss Gianni Agnelli visited Bertone Studios. The second Agnelli saw that prototype, he completely bypassed all his conservative directors and said, "Build it." Boom, approved for production. By 1972, the finished X19 was out there carving up the historic Targa Florio circuit in Sicily. But we really should look closer at that 1969 runabout concept because it totally explains the X19's DNA. Bertone's chief designer, Marcello Gandini, basically took the traditional automotive playbook and threw it out the window. He looked to the water instead. He drew direct aesthetic inspiration from the luxury racing speedboats of the era. The concept was designed as a barchetta, which literally translates to little boat in Italian. It had this long, flat hood, a transom-like rear deck, and this super prominent forward-swept rollover hoop that looked exactly like the radar arch on a luxury yacht. Now keep in mind, Gandini was already world famous at this point for designing the ultra-exotic Lamborghini Miura. But for this project, he wanted to take that exact same mid-engine exotic layout and give it to ordinary people. The design of the X19 was literally the physical bridge connecting the untouchable, high-end supercar with the populist, affordable daily driver. But drawing a beautiful wedge on paper is one thing. Actually figuring out how to make it mechanically affordable, that was an entirely different and seemingly impossible puzzle to solve. The mid-engine mechanical trick. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the X19 was such a game changer. Usually, designing a bespoke mid-engine platform from scratch costs
millions in R&D. But why even bother? Why does mid-engine matter so much? Well, imagine a figure skater. A traditional front-engine car is a lot like a skater spinning with their arms fully extended. All that heavy weight out at the ends resists changing direction. But when you place the heavy engine right in the middle, right behind the driver, it's exactly like that skater pulling their arms tightly into their chest. Suddenly, they spin effortlessly. This dramatically lowers the car's polar moment of inertia. Basically, it gave the X19 this telepathic, go-kart-like handling that front-engine cars simply couldn't touch. So how did Fiat pull this off without bankrupting the company? Their engineering director, Dante Giacosa, executed a stroke of absolute, undeniable packaging genius. He didn't build a new drivetrain from scratch. Nope. He went straight to the mass production parts bin. He literally took the entire front-wheel drive powertrain right out of the humble Fiat 128 family sedan, rotated the whole thing 180 degrees in one fluid motion, and just bolted it transversely, sideways, directly behind the driver's seat. It was an incredible mechanical magic trick that entirely democratized supercar architecture. The crazy part is, they didn't even have to sacrifice practicality to do it. By taking the fuel tank and the spare tire and mounting them vertically right behind the seats, the cabin stayed surprisingly spacious. Even better, that layout gave you two fully separate cargo trunks, one up front and one in the back. Plus, that yacht-inspired Targa rollover bar wasn't just for looks. It was heavily reinforced to act as a massive structural safety shield. And that intense focus on safety was absolutely crucial, because across the Atlantic, a massive existential threat was looming for this little car: the American regulatory tragedy. So the plan was always for the United States to absorb about 2/3 of all X19 production. But the American market in the 1970s was an incredibly hostile environment for a delicate, lightweight Italian sports car. In 1975, the U.S. government strictly enforced these new 5-mile-per-hour impact standards. To legally comply, Fiat had to perform some really drastic aesthetic surgery. They had to bolt on these massive, extruded aluminum ladder-style impact bumpers onto the front and rear of Gandini's beautiful, delicate design. These literal battering rams stuck out almost a foot. It completely ruined the sleek wedge profile and severely bloated the car's curb weight up to a sluggish 2,085 pounds. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the devastating numerical reality going on underneath the hood. At the exact same time they were bolting on heavy bumpers, tightening EPA emissions requirements forced Fiat to literally choke this high-revving little Lampredi engine with smog pumps and exhaust gas recirculation valves. So while the European market got to enjoy a super lively, rev-happy 75 horsepower, the American model was entirely suffocated down to a meager 61 horsepower. The irony here is just heartbreaking. Thanks to its incredibly over-engineered passenger cage, the X19 was actually one of only 2 cars, the other being a massive heavy Volvo, to successfully pass proposed federal 50-mile-per-hour head-on crash tests. It survived the brutal Ralph Nader safety crusade of the 70s, but the cost was steep. This miniature supercar became slower in a straight line than your average family station wagon. Yet, hiding just beneath all that smog equipment, a true racing monster was desperately waiting to be unleashed. The corporate racing betrayal. Enter 1974. Fiat's legendary Abarth racing department gets their hands on the car, and they build an absolute fire-breathing monster, the Abarth X19 Prototipo. Oh man, this thing was incredible. It had aggressive widened arches, a massive roof-mounted snorkel air intake, and a blistering 210 horsepower 16-valve engine. When they took it out on the dirt, development drivers found out it was actually faster and significantly more composed than the legendary Lancia Stratos. It was grabbing immediate national rally victories, and Bertone was standing by, fully ready to build the 500 road-going homologation cars required for official racing approval. But then came the cold, emotional blow. Fiat's corporate management stepped in. They looked at the numbers and decided it would be far more commercially valuable to promote their standard, high-volume family sedan than this little niche sports car. So they ordered the racing team to stand down. They completely killed the mid-engine rally project, diverting all of Abarth's resources to the Fiat 131 saloon. It was a devastating, crushing betrayal of what this chassis was truly capable of. And look, to be completely objective here, the road-going X19 did have some brutal, real-world flaws of its own. We can't gloss over that. They were built with pretty low-grade steel and practically zero factory rust-proofing, so early models would literally just dissolve in wet weather. Maintenance, a total nightmare. Just to change the spark plugs, you had to contort your arm through a cramped, tiny vertical hatch inside the passenger cabin. And the cooling system? If a mechanic flushed the coolant without bleeding a very specific, specialized valve, these massive air pockets would form, instantly overheating the engine and blowing the head gasket. So no, it was certainly not a perfect machine. Let's move to our final section and see how this all builds into the legacy of the affordable supercar. Because despite all its quirky flaws, the X19 fundamentally changed the automotive landscape forever. When you actually pit the X19 against its true competitors in the late 70s, cars like the British MG Midget or the Triumph Spitfire, the Fiat looks like a technological marvel from the future. While its British rivals were still literally bouncing around on ancient 15-year-old body-on-frame leaf springs and relying on old rear drum brakes, the X19 was boasting a highly advanced mid-engine layout, fully independent modern suspension, and four-wheel solid-disc brakes. It offered a premium, highly sophisticated driving experience right to the middle class. The legacy of this tiny wedge is absolutely monumental. Before the X19 came along, mid-engine packaging was widely treated as this fragile, exotic concept reserved strictly for the ultra-elite. Fiat shattered that class barrier for good. They proved that mid-engine dynamics could be mass-produced, and more importantly, they could be affordable. By doing that, they kicked the door wide open, establishing the definitive blueprint that would directly inspire modern, affordable mid-engine sports cars, like the Toyota MR2 and the Pontiac Fiero, over a decade later. Look, the Fiat X19 was slow in a straight line. It rusted if you looked at it wrong, and it was a serious pain to wrench on. But it accomplished something infinitely harder than setting a blistering lap record. It brought the soul of a supercar, near-perfect cornering balance, and breathtaking Italian design right to the driveway of the common enthusiast. It's an incredible reminder that true automotive brilliance isn't always about pristine perfection. Sometimes it's just about having the sheer passion and courage to build something completely different. And that is a triumph that time can never rust away. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.